In my last Cleveland Browns positional preview, I talked about the quarterback room, and in this one, I'll be talking about the ones responsible for protecting the quarterback. We're going to be going over the Browns' offensive line as their roster is set so far. Although I do feel like this offensive line's strength is more in blocking the run rather than protecting the pass. I'm not saying that their pass protection, I think, is all that bad. I think it actually is a strength of theirs, but I do feel like the biggest strength of this offensive line is doing that, running downhill, getting to the second level, creating holes for guys like Nick Chubb, and I guess now Jerome Ford is the backup running back as of right now. So I do feel like if the offensive line is having a bad day, the pass protection is going to be noticeably worse than the run blocking. I do feel like most of the starters are, they excel more at that downfield blocking, that getting to the second level and just absolutely destroying a smaller guy than they are at pass protection. And most of the Browns starters for the offensive line, I believe, are pretty much set in stone. I think for most of the offensive line, we know where they're going to stand on the roster. We kind of know who's going to make the 53-man roster and where they'll slide on the depth chart. However, I do feel like one of the more interesting position battles possibly is going to be at the center position, where you have Ethan Pocic, who I am assuming as the presumed starter right now. Last offseason, signed in free agency out of Seattle. He was definitely clearly going to be the backup center behind Nick Harris, who I'll get to after I'm done talking about Pocic, but Nick Harris goes down early in the preseason. Ethan Pocic slides in, plays very well under that Bill Callahan system, and honestly, if you didn't start watching Cleveland Browns football until week 1 of 2022, I wouldn't blame you for just thinking that Pocic was always going to be the designated starting center, and the Browns have now re-signed him to a 3-year deal worth up to $18 million, $10 million guaranteed. He was Pro Football Focus's most improved center from year to year in 2022, and along with that contract, I don't think that's a deal you make for a guy who you think is going to be the backup center for the immediate future. This is a contract you give someone who you're at least prepared for the possibility that this is going to be your starting center, not just for this season, but for the couple seasons after that as well. Now, on to Nick Harris, who was the original starting center last season. That was their plan. He was going to be the guy after J.C. Tretter retired, but like I said, he gets injured, I believe, on the second play of the first preseason game. And that just sucks to see, because this is the final year of his rookie deal. He's entering his 4th year out of Washington. And again, he had an opportunity to show this organization what he could do as a true starting center. It's going to be his first year taking the reins of that starting center job. And that opportunity was snatched away from him due to no fault of his own, or of anyone's fault, really. And to see the backup, next man up mentality, that backup steps in and takes the reins of that starting center role and does beautifully with it. So now Nick Harris is in a position where he's going to have to prove that he is head and shoulders above what Pocic is at this moment. I do feel like he will get chances in this training camp. This front office regime has been, they've been very willing to give their draft picks chance after chance after chance. So I do feel like there is a possibility that Nick Harris definitely splits starting reps with Ethan Pocic, and Pocic's contract does come with potential out options starting after this season. So if Nick Harris outplays him and is that starting center, the Browns can rid themselves of Ethan Pocic's contract. I believe they'll have to hit some dead cap if they do that, but again, this front office is very willing to eat dead cap if it means starting the better player. Another center on the roster is Luke Wypler. He is a 6th round pick out of Ohio State in this last draft. I do feel like this is a pretty good depth play, and possibly the organization sees him as the starting center in the long-term future. But honestly, right now, I don't see him really getting much NFL reps. I do believe it's a battle between Nick Harris and Ethan Pocic. Whoever loses will be the clear center number 2. Luke Wypler, I'm not even sure if he makes the 53-man roster. He did only give up 1 sack in his collegiate career at Ohio State, which is nice, but again, he's a rookie, 6th round pick. I believe if he doesn't make the 53-man roster, he'll probably go to the practice squad, and I believe they'll probably use one of those protected spots on him. I don't think that the front office would make this draft pick and just immediately cut him from the roster and expose him on the practice squad. I do feel like this, Andrew Berry does have long-term plans for him, but we might not see those plans take into effect this season. Moving on to the offensive tackles, the roster locks here are Jed Wills. He's the starting left tackle. I think in this sense, Browns fans have been a little spoiled by always having Joe Thomas. And also, Jed Wills' rookie season showed flashes of elite level play that might be working a little bit against him, because I don't think Jed Wills has been bad in a Cleveland Browns uniform. I think he's actually been a lot more good than bad. But we saw those flashes in his rookie season, and he really hasn't expanded on those since. The team has picked up his fifth-year option, so there is a bit of contract stability for Jed Wills. The organization very clearly still believes that he can blossom early in his career, and I kind of side with them on that. I do feel like Jed Wills still, we saw something in his rookie season that he still just hasn't quite found the keys to unlock, but I feel like, with Bill Callahan, and if he puts the work in to improve, if that lock does become open, I feel like Jed Wills can be a very good left tackle for the Cleveland Browns for a very long time. On the right side of the tackles, we have Jack Conklin. I feel like he's a bit of a feel-good story after he had a patella injury in 2021. He did come back earlier than expected, I believe. Still had some injury issues, but honestly, if Jack Conklin becomes a really good starter when he's in and only has to miss, 3 or 4 games a year, I would definitely take that. And even with those injury issues, I do feel like he is far and away the best option at right tackle. He's the best option out of the rest of the options available, obviously. And starting with some of the backups that I do think will land on the 53-man roster, we have James Hudson. I think he's been a plug-in guy on the offensive line for a while now. When Jack Conklin does have an injury, he's usually the guy that slides in there with some varying results. Sometimes you see that, hey, the organization definitely got something with this guy and he's playing well. Other times you see, well, yeah, he's still young, and that there's a reason he's still not starting on the depth chart yet. And then you have Dawand Jones, a 4th-round pick out of Ohio State. What immediately jumps out to you is his measurables. This is a huge guy, 6'8", 375 pounds. I remember, just watching Ohio State games. I remember hearing a soundbite where Nike had to make a whole entirely new jersey size just for this guy. But the question is, will he be able to translate that size into an NFL skill set? He can't just rely on being a huge dude like maybe he could have in college against some of the lower tier opponents, because in the NFL, these defensive ends are very much used to working against huge offensive linemen. Just because Dawand Jones is bigger than those guys doesn't mean that defensive ends won't be able to adjust and possibly win those matchups. But I am excited for what this guy can do under the tutelage of Bill Callahan, who is, he's coached this Browns offensive line for a while now to very good results. Hopefully Dawand Jones has a good mindset about his development. It's probably not all going to click immediately, and I do feel like he will stay fairly sheltered on the depth chart this season, which I think is a good thing. As he does, this is a project he probably still needs time to develop, but I'm ultimately excited for his future here in Cleveland. And Tyrone, Wheatley, and Hunter Thedford, also tackles. I feel like both of these guys are pretty unlikely to make the final 53-man roster. I doubt that it would even be a discussion. I think this is just some training camp depth. They're going to get some reps in the preseason. Maybe they impress enough to where if they don't make the Browns roster, they can latch on somewhere else. But I doubt we see much of those two in a Cleveland Browns uniform come the regular season. Moving on to the guards, starting with the roster locks of Joel Bitonio. He is the longest tenured Brown, a surefire. He's definitely the starting left guard. And honestly, I feel like I'm not worried about his play at all. He is 31, so maybe those questions creep in of will Father Time catch up to him, but 31 would be pretty early for that to happen. I mean, it has happened before. Some guys get washed in the early 30s, but I honestly have no worries about Joe Bitonio having that happen to him. On the right side for starting right guard is Wyatt Teller. He is a guy who, like I mentioned earlier, he shines in run blocking, especially when he gets to the second level. Maybe a little, again, I don't think his pass protection is all that bad. I'm just saying that if there is one part of his game that maybe defensive lines are going to scheme around, is that Wyatt Teller might not be the absolute best pass blocker, which again is fine. I will take that trade-off if it means getting an absolute motor for the run blocking. He has the backup guards, Michael Dunn and Drew Forbes. I feel like Michael Dunn is pretty much a lock to make the roster as a backup, especially considering that the Browns re-signed him in the offseason. They want him to stick around. Drew Forbes might make the final roster, or he might not. Both of them depth guards. Forbes was put on waivers by Cleveland and claimed by the Lions before the Lions put him on waivers and Cleveland claimed him back. So, welcome back to your old team, I guess. Michael Dunn also can play tackle, and again, he was re-signed this offseason, so I do feel like that the Browns see a bit more of a use for him than maybe Drew Forbes. We also have Dawson Deaton, he's entering his second season out of Texas Tech. I believe he was drafted as a center, but the Browns have him listed as a guard on their official roster. So I think he's a long shot to make the roster, but again, maybe Dawson Deaton surprises some people and he turns some head and he ends up being a depth guard. Maybe he ends up showing some more promise at center. I know Bill Callahan has definitely he's definitely made a lot of people very versatile on the offensive line, but I do feel like this is kind of a long shot guy to make the roster. And then you have Colby Gossett and Wes Martin. Much like Tyrone, Wheatley, and Hunter Thedford at tackle, these are the guards here. I would be surprised if we're even talking about them possibly making the 53-man roster coming out of training camp. But that's why you have training camp. Maybe one of these guys will turn some heads. And again, if they don't, just because they don't make the Cleveland Browns roster, there is still incentive for them to work as hard as they can, because other teams will take notice if they have a good training camp, and maybe they can stick somewhere else. So that's pretty much it for this offensive line group. Let me know what you think about them down in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far into the video, I'll see you at the next one.